Hello interwebs, I'm here to review the latest episode of Star Wars Andor. Wait, this wasn't a Star Wars Andor episode? What the f*** did I just watch? Hello interwebs, I'm here to actually review the latest episode of Star Wars The Mandalorian, Chapter 19, I believe we are on, and hot damn, like I joked about just a second ago, I was not expecting this show to suddenly become a very political show and very much a kind of Star Wars Andor-esque kind of show. Now, to be very, very clear, this episode was not at the same level of nuance and elegance that Star Wars Andor was. That show was operating on another level, but this show was definitely, especially this episode, was kind of like aiming in that direction, and I'll be frank, I'm kind of here for it. Like, again, it is not on the level of Star Wars Andor. Very different levels that we're working on here, but quite honestly, getting a peek into the sort of world of the New Republic, which is an element that we haven't really gotten to see much of, even within The Mandalorian, which has been set during this time frame, really at all. We've mostly seen, like, Empire time and explored, like, in between 3 and 4, those episodes, and we've kind of gotten little hints of the world post, episode 6 within The Mandalorian, but other than that, it's mainly been, like, everything with the New Order and all that stuff, episode 7, where we didn't get to see the New Republic because it kind of got blown up. So this little peek into what the world was like post-Empire and seeing the New Republic sort of in its height/infancy was fascinating because I think it did a lot of really intriguing world building that I think actually might be a really interesting sort of way for Star Wars to go, especially in counterpoint to what Star Wars Andor is doing. And I'm curious to see how The Mandalorian's going to handle it, because I don't necessarily trust the show to have the same level of nuanced political thought that Star Wars Andor had. I've just been wanting this show to be my fun little sci-fi Star Wars show, like fun adventure rollick. But if it does nail this, and this episode, it kind of had me intrigued. I was like, kind of like, are they gonna get this right in terms of some of the messaging here? And I think they did it decently well, and I am here for it. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that specifically, but I just have to kind of say structurally up front, it is fascinating to me that this is the direction that this season is taking, because at the end of last episode, I was kind of like, where are we going to be going with this season? Because I kind of felt like, building up to Din bathing in the waters of Mandalore was the direction of the season. Like, that was going to be what we ended the season with. So to get to that in episode 2, it kind of has me fascinated. And now actually seeing this episode and where we go with just a little bit with Bo-Katan and Din, and then this entire other storyline with our scientist in the amnesty program in the New Republic, I am just like, not the direction I would have thought the show would take, but it's fascinating, though it is telling to me in an interesting way that the episode that I've loved the most is the one that features the least Mandalorian, Din himself, so curious that. But let's get into it. Let's start off with Din and Bo-Katan's story, because I think their stuff is easiest to discuss. I did like, you got a little action sci-fi battle. I was like, okay, this is an extended sequence. But it does end in Bo-Katan's home being destroyed, and then we get, at the end of the episode, her joining sort of Din's little culty version of Mandalorians, which is going to be interesting for Bo-Katan, because, she has been someone who's, like, viewed this as a weird offshoot cult of Mandalorians, but I think last episode, getting to see, Din having such reverence for her father's past and the past of Mandalore, and then her sort of coming here and they accept her instantly when she's been so isolated and alone in her giant castle for so long. I think that's going to be for arc being like drawn into this more like traditional but somewhat culty version of the Mandalorians that Din is a part of, and I'm curious to see if there's going to be some tension there of like, my beliefs don't really line with your beliefs, but I appreciate this community. And you can take that in a bunch of different ways, to be honest. You can take it in a very culty direction. You can take it in a sense of, like, the power of community. But you can also take it in the negatives of that, too, that it can, like, get you into conspiracy theory stuff. And we haven't really gotten to see, like, the politics of Din's, Mandalorian group. And this might be an interesting way to start expressing that tension through the character of Bo-Katan, who wants community, wants to go back to, like, Mandalore, but maybe at odds with some of the values that this cult brings, but finds community with them. So I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that storyline, because I think they could do a lot of interesting things with it. I don't know if they will, but they might. But this is where we get back to the more interesting stuff for me, which is our good doctor, former Nazi, getting in this amnesty program for the New Republic. And I thought this was fascinating because it reminds me very much of there was a program after World War II where the United States brought in a lot of former Nazis to come work for America as scientists and kind of forgave them, or like I think it was like called Operation Paperclip, where they just sort of like wiped away some of their the bad stuff that they did and didn't really hold a lot of the Nazis accountable because we kind of wanted them to work for us. I mean, we had people like Werner von Braun at NASA, sort of the big one that comes to my mind immediately. We sort of like using them because we had the Russians to fight. You don't need to worry about these Nazi people. We'll bring the Russians in, and that was a very, very fucked up thing that we did. And so it kind of speaks to like the somewhat tension between, you know, fascism and also neoliberalism, which again, you know, big word to talk about with the Mandalorian. Andor, I would love to talk about neoliberalism, but here I'm sort of like fascinated by it because I'm curious to see how well the show is going to articulate this about how the Nazis were kind of incorporated into a post and other fascists were into a post World War II society and sort of the neoliberalist capitalist government of America, bringing a lot of Nazis in, because we get to see a little bit of that here where our doctor's literally speaking in front of the Senate talking about his cloning program, and then all these senators, these rich decadent people kind of coming up to him and it's like, oh, you're so brave telling your truth, former Nazi man. Oh, you're just such a brave former fascisty boy, and that reads really true. And so then we get this like amnesty program. We see these former Nazis kind of having a resentment. It's like, oh, if only we could just do the things that we do. And it's not like immediate like, oh yeah, I want to go back to the empire. The fascism was great, but this sort of like, oh, this red tape that this new republic has, it wasn't as bad like this under the empire, you know? If we could just, I'm trying to help this like government, you know, if they would just let me remove this sort of red tape to get the stuff that I know I could do if I didn't have these restrictions on. It's an interesting sort of thing, right? And you sort of see how like neoliberalism can sort of start decaying back into fascism again. I'm actually doing a whole script on this for a video later on this year for a video I'm doing on my main channel. I'm actually editing it today. So I was just sort of fascinated by this idea of them sort of like incorporating him into it, and him sort of this growing resentment. What's interesting to me is like seeing this compare to Andor, because like we do see our doctor like at cubicles working for the New Republic, and the set is like much smaller than when we saw our good boy Cyril Karn back in Andor working at his little desk for that episode, for like when he was like working there. And I'm curious to see if that was intentional. In terms of like, you can see like neoliberalism isn't like the fascism where like everyone's a big cog in a giant machine, and so it doesn't have that sort of like big visuals in mind for that, or if it was just like Mandalorian just pales in comparison to the practical sets of Andor. I mean, it could have been an interesting deliberate choice, it could have not been, but it's one that like by the juxtaposition kind of, I think there's interesting reads there, even if it wasn't intentional, of like how neoliberalism still has like the corporate cubicle bits, and it's less like overtly fascisty, but you still sort of see people being used for functions in the state and being incorporated back in. I did really like also seeing like learning a little bit of like Coruscant lore. We get to see the top of the planet, the only like top of the only visible part of Coruscant left is just the highest peak on it. That's such a fascinating little like world building element that I thought was very kind of just cool and fun. And I like the bonding that we get to see between our doctor and Kane. His name was like Pershing, and her sort of like manipulating him into sort of like throwing him under the bus because she wanted to get back at him with some of the terrible things he did, and sort of like, I also really liked how Kane encouraging Pershing to touch the top of the mountain and then him getting in trouble for it is kind of a microcosm of what she's doing to him generally, that she's manipulating him into wanting to break the law and ultimately getting him in trouble with the amnesty program. So like I just like that scene was just sort of a microcosmic version of what she's doing to him on the larger scale. I thought that was a nice little bit of subtle storytelling there. She kind of felt like this isn't a one for one, but like people who would try to get like like get back at the Nazis who were incorporated back into society because they had done them wrong. I know this isn't an exact one from. I know there's a lot of like Israeli groups that would go and find former Nazis that had sort of gotten under the grid. It's not a one for one because a lot of those Jewish Israeli groups are like finding Nazis who like weren't incorporated into America but like had gone off to like other countries and sort of laid low. And I'm sure I don't know the exact history, but I'm sure similar things happened within the United States as well in terms of like trying to hold Nazis accountable and sort of bringing their history back up as well. They kind of should to a degree. But Arcane has that much more like a personal vendetta, and she tortures the man, and he doesn't deserve that. He should be held accountable. I don't really believe in torture as the punishment, but you see how that sort of like trauma begetting trauma idea that we sort of get expressed through her character. So I'm ultimately kind of curious to see where they're going to go with that storyline, because where it ends, it kind of ends at a spot that I'm like, well, is his brain sort of wiped now? Is he going to be able to continue his cloning stuff? Was she trying to do that for a different reason of like she's trying to hide the cloning information and she's still working for, you know, Moff Gideon or something like that? Or was this just sort of like her trying to vent her trauma by getting back at this man who like is a symbol of the abuse that she might have faced under Moff Gideon? So there's a lot of questions that I'm sort of curious to see where that storyline is going. If it's going to be following her, or if it's going to be following like she's an agent of Moff Gideon, or if we're going to come back to Pershing, he's going to be doing some cloning stuff, like possibly leading to dear Lord Palpatine or Snoke. But we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, I'm sort of curious to see where all of that's going. I'm trying to think if there's anything more specific. I'm sure I could like nitpick some stuff. I did like some of the visual elements of him like becoming more like resentful at the New Republic by like eating the Empire rations, the sort of like very structured-y rations that he had. I found that to be like an interesting little visual metaphor throughout the episode. Like I said, I think I'll wrap out there. This was a very interesting episode, one that has me way more intrigued for the direction of The Mandalorian going forward, but one that I am curious to see how I'm going to end up feeling about, because it feels like it might draw unfavorable comparisons to Star Wars Andor. I am here for it. I found this fascinating, but I do know that Star Wars Andor tried this in a much stronger way. But this is basically the way I'm thinking of it now is like Andor was about fascism and how neoliberal, which is like the decayed version of like a neoliberalist society decays into fascism and strongman politics. And this is very much like the like neoliberalist version of Andor about like how neoliberalism can decay back into like democratic inaction and things like that because they incorporate these Nazi people. How much have I fucked up my comments, by the way, with this review? I've just realized that I probably fucked up my comments quite a bit by talking about politics and Star Wars, but honestly, this episode has me fascinated in a way that I'm intrigued by, especially considering my recent script that I'm currently editing right now is about how neoliberalism decays into fascism using Star Wars Andor, or Star Wars generally as a metaphor. So I'm like, well, might need to add some shit to my script after this episode. Anyways, that's my review of this one. I am fascinated by this one. I'm curious to see where this is going to go. But with all that said, I wish you the best and hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.